minutes past 6:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. I want to thank you all for coming. This is an extra meeting because there were some questions that we weren't quite able to answer at the end of the mid-year review. So we'll try to make this brief. I'd like to get out of here in less than an hour. We're not going to discuss next year's budget in detail. Revenue questions may come up that would flow into next year, but the details of the budget next year, the details of the fire department study, all that will be for the regular seasonal meetings, which begin in December. I'd like to do a review of the minutes, and I want to thank those of you who did the minutes. There were good details. Jamie isn't here, but I know she also had his carryover points in the minutes, which is helpful to her. So, good job in the minutes from my standpoint. Any other comments on the minutes? Any changes or corrections? Okay, all in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, thank you. I assume that the mic's on now? Yeah, sounds like you can hear me, good. Okay, basically, it's a review of the budget revenue status. There are some projects that have been underway, and there's some other programs, and if you have, members of the budget committee have questions, you can bring them up to the selectmen. But what I'd like to do is turn the meeting over to our selectmen's rep, Mr. Connors, at this point, to give us a brief overview, I think first of where we stand financially, and then where the projects and the expenditures stand. If you could kind of walk us through in that.
Martha and I will go through this with you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And thank you very much for having me. Right now, the revenues projections are in good shape. We're pleased with the way things are going. We'll know a little bit better the first week of December. As you know, the bills are out around the 1st of November, so we'll project revenues coming in the first week of December, and we will have a good handle. As of right now, departments and everybody have worked to keep the numbers down, and we have on hand from last year $571,000. And Martha, you correct me if I get in the middle of this. In savings, not savings, but unexpended, we haven't expended out of last year's budget, which was $7.2 million. So we didn't do the 15%, but we're about half, better than half of that right now. By postponing and doing things like paving and not having certain programs like the youth program we have in the summer and things like that have been cut. So not cut, but the money wasn't used or the programs weren't used.
So you anticipate to realize the savings through cutting some programs and delaying others into the next year's budget. We have about 7.5% or 7%.
Well, yeah, I'd say about 7-8%.
Okay.
I don't have.
And
Yeah.
revenue for this year, so the tax bills go up, that's part of revenue for this year, you don't really know, but your anticipation is what? About even?
Yes, I would say, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, please.
It sounds like there wasn't a serious shortfall in revenue.
Not this year. We were anticipating, we never knew what was coming, and it's still, a lot of it, at the last meeting, Brandon pointed out, a lot of the stimulus money was going to be gone and like that. You can see, if you read, bankruptcies is going up, everything is going up, and we're watching that very, very closely.
Yeah.
But as of now, we're in good financial conditions we're at.
Oh, okay, yeah. Jamie, your question, please.
Living paycheck to paycheck is probably not a great idea. It's probably a better idea to spend last year's money next year. Obviously, you can't just skip a year, but it's stressful to live paycheck to paycheck, and that's the way the towns are set up. Anything we can do to anticipate a low revenue and in our budget, because the COVID numbers are exponentially spiking right now, which means that, okay, we're okay right now, but, what's gonna happen, this summer, this time next year, et cetera. And so we really should be not living paycheck to paycheck, but, thinking ahead.
Okay, this might be a good time to mention, Ted, and talk about withheld expenses. Based on this year's budget that was approved, you are withholding a sort of strategic amount of delayed expenses. And how much is that?
You had said 571,000?
Yeah,
$571,000. Okay, so that sort of answers somewhat your question, David.
Yep.
We got 571,000, and probably as we start our first couple of meetings in December, the selectmen will say, okay, we can spend that 571,000, it's already was budgeted, or, all right, you're right, revenues are less than we expected, but we're gonna have to readjust. And maybe take some of that surplus and roll it into next year's operating budget.
Right, I strongly would suggest that 2021's budget, should be bare bones.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in 2021, you know, I don't
Yes,
want to get into that.
I
You
think that's,
were right late that I mentioned we're gonna talk about this year's budget, but you're right. In 2021 is where we really gotta roll up our sleeves.
it's gonna hurt.
Yeah, right now we can't anticipate, go ahead.
the department heads we've talked with, we've asked them to submit even or reduced budget, and the budgets we've seen so far, the department heads are coming in with realistic numbers. We might have to cut them a little more as the year progresses, but I think the team is working well together.
And I hope I'm wrong, and I hope we cut,
I-
and then we end up, having a,
Mhm.
the right thing, but we don't know.
Yeah,
Right.
Can I ask a question?
sure.
So in terms of for this year's budget, I think we all got our tax bills this year.
Yes,
And for the town component of that, it's an increase of 59 cents,
right.
which is significantly higher than any tax increase that we've seen, and certainly in my tenure here and going back many, many years. So if our revenue, if we're in a good place, although there's still some uncertainty to that, but right now we're in a decent place, what's the rationale for having such a significant tax increase?
Well, we had to give some abatements of this year. The power plants are the big thing, power plants are 49-ish% of the town's revenue, and,
How much were the abatements for?
I don't know.
Just in this last couple of weeks, we've done $150,000 abatement. We have, and I think you've all been reading the newsletter, the power plants are on a significant downward trend. We have 200 potential for, at least $160 million decrease in EP Newington alone.
But that's potential, right?
Yeah, that's not what
So-
the tax rate. is.
We've
Right.
already reduced it by $40 million this year.
So I'm still not
And that's
connecting.
just EP Newington, that doesn't include the Newington Station, which we're also significantly down. We went from 78 million down to 55 million. These affect the tax rate, the assessed value of our town, and
If we could get some detail on that, and you may not have it today, but I think for the future meeting, I'd like to understand the specific breakout and what the abatements we've had to pay out, and how it's actually impacted the town, because we're also bringing business in. So, there's a disconnect for me, and it's just because I'm not close to the detail, but I'd like to see that, because that's a
Sure.
significant
I wish
increase.
I could say that we've brought any major business in yet, but I know we're right on the cusp. You know, we have the Subaru dealership and a hotel, hopefully, other things.
We had a couple of big things coming in this year that we thought would help us, like the hotel and Northeast Credit Union and a couple of other big things. But we put it up, last summer, put everything on hold because of the COVID situation. And, They're just holding off for a year before they do some of this stuff.
I guess my request is I'd like to see specifically what the
Sure.
abatements are and how it would translate into a 59% increase.
We're happy to do that.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Is there any new information on the court challenges?
Say that again, I'm
You know,
sorry.
with the,
What
I
challenges?
know there were, we were gonna try to settle some of the abatement requests in courts.
Yeah, well, we're still with our legal people on the EP Newington one, we did settle the Newington Station one. Yeah, we're still in negotiations, with the big one, which is the EP Newington.
That's a question about that too, on the same thread as Jen. So you mentioned that there was $150,000 abatement for one of the commercial spots, then there was a $23 million. So those are real dollars in terms of valuation, right? And I'm assuming that the $23 million one was a settlement?
Right,
We settled at $23 million?
right.
That represents $23,000 in tax revenue. Right?
I'd wanna go over those figures and
I think
Well,
you
let-
need
break
zero to
them
that.
down for you.
I don't think so. I think
23
23 million divided by 1,000 times $10 per 1,000 is $23,000.
Maybe, it doesn't sound.
Doesn't sound right.
Well, it's a $1 billion
Yeah.
valuation in pounds, isn't it?
A billion, yeah.
Isn't that what we go off of?
It's 10,000 per million.
So for example, our
23
160
million is
million,
230,000.
right, so the 160
Sorry,
that
you're
we're
right.
looking
I
at,
did
that would
it
be a
2.6.
buck.
You're only off by an
60
order of
tax rate.
magnitude. But it's something. It's easy to make that mistake.
What's a decimal?
That's
right.
That's the decimal.
Right.
The $230,000, there's also a $1,500 one. Is the consensus that the tax increase, along with the valuation increase that hit, is solely due to the abatements?
Primarily, there are some things that were approved at town meeting that weren't in the original budget that you passed, that increased the town budget slightly. But yes,
Okay. To the tune of what kind of dollars or Martha? Like what kind of dollars are we talking about the increases?
so you'll recall, we passed the safety lane, amendment to the
Safety
general
lane.
budget, 140,000. We increased.
But that was only if we got approved, right?
That's
So
on pause,
that's
right?
not, that's.
It's all,
we got
we
the
haven't
money.
spent the money, but it's there.
It's part of the
So I guess
budget.
that leads into my next question then. So does anybody have a breakdown of where the 571,000 in unspent appropriated funds are coming from? How do you make up 571,000? I'm assuming you had a rec budget of 51K that was basically cut, right? So we'll start at 50 there.
It's a 2 full-page document that I could certainly read if you want.
You can give me the highlights. Did you print that for
Okay,
everybody,
okay.
Martha?
Was this in our packet or no? This was
No.
in the packet.
That's
No.
not
We're
the
just
packet.
putting this together for you for tonight, for us.
At the September meeting, it was in your packet.
That was proposed, and everybody had a lot of questions, including the police department, the fire department, board of fire engineers.
Right, this is absolutely just a working document. It is not like-
571,000 is awfully specific for a working number. Do we know how many funds, how many dollars there are that are left there not going to be spent by 12/31 and not encumbered?
That hasn't been established yet.
So the 571 is what you're thinking is going to happen?
Not necessarily. The selectmen, I believe, are going to be looking at how the tax revenues come in and then determine what next steps will be. Will departments be allowed to expend funds? I expect that some of the funds will be allowed.
So what's a disconnect for me is the fact that we're hearing from Ted that we're in good shape, at least so far. So there's a year, like it's not even 6 weeks left of the year. So what are you expecting to sort of change that good shape status? I'm not, I think that's what I think Brendan's also asking. Is that, the year's almost over. And you know, typically you should be able to project and predict the next 6 weeks. And it doesn't sound like, you know, we know that. And so what I'm trying to getting back to the tax rate again, you know, to raise a tax rate to 59 cents, which is unheard of in recent times. But yet, I'm not seeing the fact that our revenues have been dramatically impacted. So that's, I need an answer to that question.
Our particular concern is the tax funds coming in. We are cautiously optimistic that everything is going to be okay. We've heard from the two malls that their intention is to pay their tax bill, so that's very encouraging.
I'm
That is
a
encouraging.
big fan of conservative budgeting, because you have to make sure that you don't go too, you know, you have to have some sort of a cushion, I get all that. But to me, this is more than conservative budgeting. This is taking advantage of a situation where I still don't have an answer as to why we're spending why the tax increase is going up 59 cents.
Maybe
That's
it's
not
better to
cons-
put it in different words. So we're claiming there might be $571,000 of funds that were appropriated this year, tax base that was raised, that sounds like now potentially might not be spent, may be spent. And there's also a tax rate increase, and somehow the biggest abatements don't even add up to what that is. It doesn't make any sense. So like, just maybe we're months behind where you guys are day to day, and you're so, you know, sometimes you're so much further down the decision-making process than we are starting at the beginning. If you could just kind of back up and say, this is what happened.
I don't know where to start with your questions. 55 cents is.
59 for Newington.
Actually, I thought it was 55.
It's 59 for the
59.
town, and it's 55 in total.
With an increase in valuation too for 2020, so that's kind of a double whammy for all the taxpayers, all the residents in town. So there's a significant increase in revenue there. Sounds like there's a significant savings in terms of the total budget that was already raised for 2020. And if we project the 500, let's just call it 500, so 571,000. If we project that that is going to be returned to the general fund, why would there be an increase in taxes?
There can be no projection that the 571,000 cannot be part of the tax rate. That has already been raised by town meeting. Even though we may save it, although I emailed all of the departments and asked them, you know, what are their projects that they expect or need to spend by the end of the year to get a dollar amount for you all. But that 571 is part of the budget that goes into the tax rate whether we save it or not. Okay, so we're just looking at the abatements that we've spent already affecting the tax rate, the assessed value.
Maybe I can ask you another
That's
question.
clear as mud.
I understand the part that
Sorry.
when the town votes, when the town votes a budget, you're required to set a tax rate that will cover that budget.
What's on that number?
Yeah, the only flexibility you have is the unappropriated balance that's out of the reserve, but that's just a small amount. So my next question, when would you set the next tax rate?
Next October of 21.
Okay, so it's till October. And that tax rate will reflect the budget that we propose to the town meeting. I think
Correct.
that's important to focus on. If we want a lower tax rate, and we've got major power plant abatements looming, then we're talking about cutting services. There's no, you know, it's gotta come from somewhere. But right now, the tax rate is set based on what we voted last year. Now, if money isn't spent, it can go revert back to the unappropriated balance.
Correct.
That is a cushion to help the tax rate next year. Now, in addition, as I understand it, you already have built up this unappropriated balance to some extent in anticipation of that. Maybe not a lot, but how much is in our unappropriated balance now?
2.3 million.
Okay, so that's a pretty good cushion. And that's what I think is what you're getting, what both of you are
Yes.
getting at. That this is our rainy day fund, if
Yes.
you will.
Yes.
So why raise the tax rate so
Well,
much?
that was based on the amount of money the town already spent, already voted.
Yeah, to be fair, Jen, I would've given them as much trouble if they'd spent the unappropriated fund balance to keep the tax rate low. You know, so
Well, I think
like,
there was, I think 175,000 was spent, right, of it, to keep the tax rate.
Yeah,
This year,
yeah, they added 175
To
to, yes.
offset some of the.
I would kind of agree with Brenda. I'd rather have that money for next year, because next year's gonna hurt.
That's a big year. I mean, we didn't know what this year would bring, Mr. Chairman, and I think we're coming out of pretty good. Next year's the big unknown, because
Yeah.
what you're reading with all the bankruptcies and all of the stuff that's going on, and the virus is getting so much worse. Even the
Yeah.
state of New Hampshire today, the governor came out to, masks everywhere all the time, so it's not a rosy picture for those next few months or year.
all right, if you mind, Chairman, I gotta figure out what is the actual amount of money that is going to be saved by the departments that made cuts this year?
Well, the departments have proposed in a worst-case scenario that,
Martha, if I can interrupt you, that's from July, maybe August,
August 31st.
August
right.
31st. Do you guys not have any updated numbers on the department's expenditures on the 15% proposed budget cuts since August 31st?
Now, as I remember, they did say that there was about a 7.5% realized savings.
Well, that's what's up for debate, because
Okay.
Chairman just said, we asked for 15%, looks like we're gonna get about half of that, but now it sounds like, well, maybe not, because we're gonna go back to those departments, and we don't know what they've spent, A, and B, the money might be freed up.
We have we know what they spent. It's just that they have cut back, and like, we get into certain things, we'll cut back, all right, and there's certain things that have been held off, like there's some road work that has to be done, and like that. So we're held off on that, maybe we'll do it next year, but if it looks good by the 1st of December, we might release it and get it done this year.
I don't believe there are any extra funds that the departments know about or any changes to their budgets, but we have the police and fire here. If there are any changes, feel free to tell the committee from your original numbers.
At some point, somebody who's budgeting has to be able to say, this is what our budget was, this is how much we plan to spend by December 31st, and here's how much we saved, right?
Right.
Somebody has to be able to say that, right?
Right.
Okay, so, I mean, we get two departments here.
John, would we like to speak to that?
I was hoping the chief would be here, because
Oh,
he has the
okay,
true
it's-
numbers.
In specific numbers, the fire department, future budget is coming in lower. The fire department has raised a tremendous amount of revenue this year. And we have controlled our spending. So at the end of the year, we anticipate having a significant give back as well.
Okay, so, and just based on like what we were talking about before with, 2020 budget's kind of here,
Sure.
that all of your revenues will kind of impact moving forward, but for this year, for what you were, scheduled to be spending this year, do you know what the total is that you're gonna have spent?
Right now, there's $117,000 overage sitting there.
Great, and that's not expected to be spent.
Not necessarily, depending on what happens with payroll.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well, if we, through the end of the year, we have our staffing.
Sure.
We
Okay.
don't know what's going to happen if,
Sick days, quarantine.
Exactly, or if we
Gotcha.
have a wreck with a truck.
Okay,
But what I can tell you is, our give back is in place. Our future budget is coming in lower, and we have raised, again, a significant amount in revenue.
okay,
If I am not incorrect, John,
No,
is it 130?
last check, yeah, the numbers might have gone up since that
Right.
was given to us by the chief.
Right, exactly, and again, this is a public, meeting tonight, but not a public hearing, which is why numbers are not in front of us.
Yeah.
no problem. your budget's right around $2 million as proposed by a selectman for February.
1,916,000.
Yes, so the savings that you think you found is about 5%.
Yes. Yes.
Good, commendable.
Okay,
Chief?
can-
Oh,
can- before we
sorry.
just go, so there's a decent amount of savings, whatever the number is, it's a significant amount.
Yeah.
So what happens to that when it goes back? So
Well,
how do
that's
you
the question, there's the general revenue fund.
Right.
That's where the revenues go, that's where the give back goes. If you kick that back to the budget amount that's coming in lower, I agree with you, I do not understand a double-digit 59-cent per thousand increase.
So so I guess what I'm trying to put together is, if there's money coming back from a department that's a fair amount of money,
Right.
doesn't matter how much it is, I'm talking concept, what's gonna happen to that money? So we don't wanna spend
Historically,
it.
it has gone into the general fund, and again, from the general fund, they come back with receiving money and a tax increase.
We don't know who we're gonna receive the money. We set the rate, it has to be done in July, and it has to be done by October, so we get the bills out in November. So we don't know this, and even as, this engineer just said, you know, they don't know exactly if something big comes up, they're gonna have to use some of the money, which hopefully they don't have to. But, we're basing it on a number that the monies that were passed at the town meeting budget in March.
Right, so you guys can't do anything about 2020, like we were saying, right, Chairman? I mean, 2020, that is going to be the rate. It's, if you've overdone it, 2021, you get a tax break.
Yeah, if
The
we
rate
get,
can go
if we get
down.
$500,000 or 400 or whatever,
That
that'll
doesn't-
go on to offset the expenses of the next year, which would help to hold the
It
rate.
does not fully address Jen's concern though, which is, where does the money go? Because if it just goes back to general fund to be spent on something else, then it's kind of,
Well,
it's
that's-
good prudent accounting on their end, but not on the town.
That's a good point. But basically, if you've got, towards the end of the year, you've got unspent money, you can do two things with it. You can encumber it, which basically means you spent it out of the current year's budget. Or you can roll it over into the unbudgeted fund. And basically, then the budget committee gets a half that, it basically becomes our money. You
Well,
put
I
that,
suggest that we do that, I
it
think,
belongs to the next year's budget.
and I think it needs to.
But if they put off a lot of expenses like police cruises and fire truck repair, you gotta do it sometime. You know, and some of that money would have to roll into next year's budget. But I kind of agree with you, I'd like to see a savings that actually goes into the unbudgeted fund, so that we can decide, the town can decide, how much of that they wanna spend. That gives them more control next year.
As a budget committee, it's an interesting conversation to say, hey, what would we prefer and what would we recommend, right? 'Cause that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And say, you know, because I have, just devil's advocate, food for thought. You know, if the fire department's prudent with their spending and they say, hey, you know, we're gonna end up with over $100,000 of expenditures, we should, you know, does the budget committee wanna say, well, you should encumber those for projects that you weren't complete, and then come back to us with a budget next year of less, $117,000, something like that, and allow them to remain with their funds, and at the end of the day, what we end up doing as a town is spending less. Right?
Yes.
And we rewarded the department with, they still have their,
Yeah.
it's not like, lose it again.
I guess my point is, I think that, you know, we all are in agreement that we are going into uncertain times, and we wanna make sure that we're not caught in a bad situation. But I think that we have to be very judicious in whatever way we do this, so that the taxpayer is not stuck paying money because there's special projects going on or whatever. So we need to be very, very, you know, from a budgeting perspective, very tight with every dollar that's being spent. And so I guess that's just, you know, my point, and I appreciate the tax, rate conversation, but it's still a huge increase. And, you know, the people who in this town, you know, because of COVID, there's people getting laid off all the time, and to see a big increase like that hit, that's not, yes, we have to make sure that the town, you know, is viable, but we also have to make sure its residents aren't getting penalized either. And so there's that balance.
Okay, let me make sure we're covering all the points we need to. I think we're talking about unspent balance, which you've mentioned, which is, again, is it 1.71? How much is that, Hans?
Roughly 2 million.
Roughly.
Is that the cash on hand? Because Martha's email said 1.8 million on hand.
No, those are two different things. So the actual cash that we have in our checking account right now, or as of last week, was the 1.8. But the 2.3 is the audited December 31st, 2019 undesignated fund balance. So they take a snapshot at the very end of the year, like they will this year, to see how much what our funds
Leftover money. Anything that isn't encumbered.
Right.
And anything and not spent rolls over. And they're projecting 2.3.
Right.
You know, I think if I could solidify what we're saying, is we would like you to take some of the savings you've realized this year
Oh,
and roll it over to next year. So when we have our budget discussions, we can decide. Yeah, just give you a simple example. You know, you need a new police cruiser, you need a new fire chief's car, or assistant chief's car. Do we buy them this year, or do we put them over next year and say, okay, you know, we didn't encumber the money, it's next year, can we afford to spend it in next year's budget? That's just one example, not to pick on people, but it's just, those are two small capital expenditures that would be something that you could decide in next year's budget as opposed to automatically spending in this year's budget. Does that make sense to the committee? Just to put it in those
Yeah, it does.
simplistic terms? Okay. All right, yeah.
I have updated information.
Okay.
Chief Hoyt is at another meeting,
Uh-huh.
and he corrected my figure. We are, best guess at this point, turning in between 125 and 130,000.
Okay. All right.
Good, thank you.
So what, Chairman, what's the board's recommendation for how that happens? Would we recommend that they find the line items that they can encumber for projects next year and encumber the money? Or is our recommendation that they turn it back over to the general fund?
To me, personally, they save that money. It makes perfect sense to keep that for next year's fire truck money, or fire station money, if they need a new, whatever. That's what why spend today's money? You wanna spend last year's money today, and then stay 1 year ahead. That was my point coming in. So this is last year's money in theory, right? If we're talking 2021, this is money that was from 2020. That should be allocated to the fire station if they need stuff in 2021. But buy it with last year's money. Don't live paycheck to paycheck. Stay
Okay, so
one year ahead.
That's not for encumbrance.
It's not for encumbrance?
That's the opposite.
Okay,
In my view,
okay.
I may not know all the terminology. I'm not a
Mhm.
budget, I'm not an accountant or CPA or anything that.
Let's just.
But the concept is, don't live paycheck to paycheck.
Right, okay. So let me try to explain as I envision in my experience. Again, I'll go back to the pickup truck and the police cruiser. If you encumber the money, you're saying we're buying a new police cruiser. Maybe it's gonna come in February, and we're spending it out of this year's budget. That money is spent, it's a done deal. You're getting a new police cruiser, whenever it comes in. If you don't spend money on the police cruiser or the pickup truck you get in fire department, it appears in next year's budget. And the town then decides whether it needs a new police cruiser or pickup truck or not. If you encumber it, it's already decided.
It's also already
But
funded.
does it have to be spent a certain year? Let's say you bought, you
I'll
have
answer
the
the question.
money for the police cruiser, but yours lasts another 3 years. You don't buy it, not this year, you wait for 3 years
Okay.
until
If you encumber it, normally you're spending it early in the next fiscal year. You're actually taking.
I think there's limits for how long you
Yeah, there is.
encumber.
There are limits.
Yeah.
I think it's a full year, but I have to open it. If it's in the budget, then you need to spend it, you know, if it's in next year's budget.
So that's the
I would-
problem, is you have to spend the money. It'd be fantastic if you have a piece of equipment that costs X dollars, and you have X dollars in the bank, and you don't spend it until you have to spend it. You don't spend it just because the budget says I have to do it this year.
Okay.
That doesn't make any sense. You wait until the thing dies, and then you got the money.
Let me put out something, sort of a sense of the budget, maybe, without getting too specific and maybe don't need to use motion. My sense, the sense of the budget committee is that where possible and feasible, you roll over an expense to the next year's budget as opposed to encumbering it now. I know that you can't, some of the stuff you gotta do, and that's your job. I appreciate your job doing that. But I think our sense is we don't have to encumber it this year. Let's put it in next year's budget and see how everything sits on. Depending what the revenue is at the end of the next year. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yes, but just get back to one thing, James, the doc said. Just get the cruiser after the cruiser dies, well, to get a police cruiser, and I don't know this just through budget here, it takes months, you just don't go down to the Ford garage and the Chevy garage and pick up a police cruiser, or you can get a car, but one with the equipment and one with this heavy duty equipment and it's gonna last longer, the last I knew it was 6 to 8 months to order one and get it in, so, yeah, you gotta do some planning in this, and you just can't, when it dies, you go get one.
That's the planning that we
Lead
come
times,
to.
you know the lead times, but you know what they are.
No, but, Doc, in fairness, this is something that we've kind of collectively come up with as a board in the town in years past, which is, hey, if we know that the average life of the cruiser is so many years, once a year, we should just buy one instead of having a free cruiser, service on your plate this one year that popped up out of nowhere, and everybody says, hey, what's the story of after they die? It's almost like, saying, we just bought an ambulance, but every year there's a warrant article for another, $30,000 or $50,000 goes through the ambulance. Everybody says, why are we paying for an ambulance again? Well, so we don't have to pay for an ambulance in 1 year. Right?
Well,
It's
the
kind of
point
the same
is,
thing,
it's to
rolling
keep the tax rate even.
Right.
Is what
It's supposed to keep the tax rate even.
Spread your expenses out, you take your items on over a given number of years.
To keep the tax rate even.
Right,
Which is
yeah,
not the
yeah.
situation that we're in now.
Well, I think it's important that we don't confuse revenue with expenses.
Yeah.
The tax rate depends on how much we spend, but it also depends on the tax base.
Yeah.
And if we lose 100 million in tax base, that's gotta be made up.
Yeah, I wanna make a comment about that too. I think, I've been in town a little over 4 years now. One of the great things about Newington is it's really low tax rate. It's like the lowest 5% in the state, which isn't realistic if you think about it. I mean, why is it that low? And it's because we've enjoyed a great advantage in this town with the industry on that side of the highway. And we're entering into a period where assessed values are, that we took for granted for years and years here, are now going down. And I think it's gonna be a dip, and I think they're gonna come back up. It's just a cycle we're going through. And so that leaves you in a position from a budget standpoint where if you keep the rate relatively level, then your revenues are gonna go down. But your services and your budget basically stays about the same. So that doesn't work. You need to make up the difference. Or you take what has been an acceptable, prudent budget and then say, because the revenues are down, no, instead, to keep that tax rate level, we're gonna cut the budget, 5% or whatever it is, 10%, to keep that rate right where it is, and that's not prudent either, that's not realistic. And so I'm not making a recommendation or anything here, I'm just saying to me, this is what's confronting the budget committee and the town fathers here on how do we get through this period where, particularly the energy plants over there are gonna pay a lot less in tax revenue.
I agree with that. I think it's to the degree in which, right? I think that clearly you don't wanna have a tax rate that's gonna be stagnant and not meet the needs. But I think it's to the degree and to the level. And, and proper budgeting, I mean, that's the whole point. This has been our mantra for years now, where we try to keep it so that there isn't these huge spikes, recognizing that I'm not saying there shouldn't be a spike, it's to the degree, how big is the spike?
very honestly, the selectmen as a group and with Martha and Helena, we try to keep our expenses down. We're very conservative. We haven't done any really things. We watch it very, very closely, and we try to get the biggest bang for the buck and watch income and our expenses quite closely. And every week or so, we go over it, where we're going. So I think you're in good hands with your guidance and help. I think we're in good hands to pull this, to keep this going. But Mr. Wright is right. You know, we're in a cycle here that's kind of unique for the town. We have great waterfront property. We got great industrial land over there. We might have a hiccup for a while, but it is gonna come back up. So, I think Newington, the peninsula that it is a great place and has great potential, and I don't think we're getting whacked back. We're gonna get some hiccups along the way.
So we see this happening, let's decide what our philosophy is, and I think that's what you're trying to say. If you have a revenue shortfall, is your philosophy to cut? Is the philosophy to find other resources somewhere else to make up the difference? Now, obviously, you wanna try to do both, but that may not be possible in the time frame that we would hope for. But we have to be, when it's cuts, we have to be on the same page to make it effective. If we're trying to make up revenue somewhere, we have to be on the same page to make it effective. If one person wants to cut, the other one wants to change the revenue source, we're fighting against each other and not making progress in either way.
I think everybody's kind of saying the same thing, and I think it's a good conversation, but we could be here all night talking about philosophy on budgeting, when we're supposed to talk about how much money we're not going to spend this year, where it's going, how we're preparing for next year, and the philosophical edges of how we spend and what we cut is gonna be for 2020 budget meetings as they come up next month, I think.
That's why I think it, you know, to both of your points, this next year, we're not gonna have a stable, growing tax base. We're gonna take some hits, we all talked about. So, in past years, we could pass a budget with, you know, some for inflation, some for improved services. Next year, our decision, our budget is gonna directly reflect the tax base. So having the numbers that Brandon had talked about in terms of what your anticipating revenue is, I know it's hard to predict, what the tax base is gonna look like, and how much money you're rolling into next year into the budgeted balance, will help us. You know, we can have that towards the end of the year as we start finalizing these budgets. I think we as both the selectmen and the budget committee, need to be able to explain to the town, this is what we've got, these are the hits we're taking, these are the savings we realized, and this is the tax rate increase that we've been able to manage. You know, so when you vote this budget, this is what we're predicting for a tax rate. And I think that's all we can do, and let the people decide.
Absolutely.
But,
So,
yeah,
John, if you
it's
don't
a
mind.
balancing act.
Back to this, and I hear your comments, Chairman, about, you know, how conservative you guys are and all that stuff. We're in good hands and everything like that. What I'm most interested in talking tonight about the year 2020 and the budget cuts that we've asked the different departments to take. And we delayed this meeting so that we would be able to have some empirical data on the departments and what they haven't spent. Because one of the main things I remember from Chief Bilodeau on August 31st was that he didn't have any guidance on, hey, as we keep moving this target down the road, the amount that I could save gets shorter and shorter. Is that paraphrasing you all right?
You're doing a good job.
All right. And it doesn't sound like we still have a handle, even though we delayed this meeting and we brought it up in August 31st. It still doesn't sound like we have a firm grasp on what each department is going to be returning to the town, and then B, what the town's plan is with those funds. Which I thought was what this meeting was about.
Yeah, we only have, what, 6 weeks left this year?
Well, that's my
Is
point.
is that the case though?
So what's done is done.
We don't know how much the departments have saved, and we don't know what the town's doing it after we have it returned.
So just, I can speak for the town budgets. We expect that we will be saving $364,000. Those are the cuts that we've made in the budget.
Okay, so where did 571 come from? That's a different number.
That includes the 74,000 for police, 109,000 for fire, and 6,100 for cemetery, 15,000 for library, and 750 for conservation.
What's the total budget?
That is not $364,000, Martha.
No, I thought you were asking what the extra was to get to the 571?
Oh,
The 364.
gotcha, okay, so that's the
Yeah.
difference between 571 and 364.
Right, right.
Okay, so I think
Sounds like
you've
it's
got a
like
sense
1%.
of it. What I guess, the bottom line now is come the middle of December, after our, first or second meeting, I think we'd like to say, from you guys, okay, this is what we're encumbering and why, and this is what we're able to roll over into the unbudgeted for you people to consider in next year's budget, and why. So you're gonna have two lists, what you're encumbering and what you're rolling over, unspent.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add, we also are dealing with, how many abatements, Martha, we get, 6 or 7?
We have 3 pending lawsuits right now,
3
and
pending lawsuits, but we got some other abatements that are
right,
coming in.
Board of Tax and Land Appeals issues.
But all
Well,
that's,
that's the
that's
rest of that
2021, right?
That's the other concern, because these are rolling into costs for the town, that's what we're dealing with.
Okay, so thanks for bringing that up, Mr. Marconi. So are you proposing that the $570,000 in savings this year, you guys are gonna use for some of the costs of fighting the abatements in 2021?
I can't say that, sir.
Okay, so if you don't mind me asking, then what was the point you're trying to make? That's 2021's budget, right?
Right.
What does that have to do with the savings from 2020?
It really doesn't at this point. What I'm trying to tell you is, it was mentioning about the tax rate going up. This may affect next year's tax rate a little bit higher as well, because we're dealing with these tax payments, we have to give the money back to these people. And there's a lot of money out there that's hanging out there right now, so we can't really guarantee anything at this point.
Well, we
Understood.
discussed that previously, and what I'd asked for is a detailed description of what justifies the
I understand
increase.
what you're asking for, yeah.
So I think, we can, I look forward to getting
I
that.
think
We'll give it the best figures we can.
Can I give us some figure on the tax base? Now, I don't want you to give away your last bargaining position.
No, that's not the point.
Thank you.
I know this is
Thank
important,
you.
but give us some sense of what the tax base look like this year and what it's gonna look like next year,
We can try to do that.
Be as I say, don't give away your bargaining position. Try to give us that sense, because we're responsible for tax rate, basically.
Right.
Ultimately,
Yes.
what the budget committee recommends to the town, we're recommending a tax rate.
Thank-
Selectmen
thank-
actually said.
Thank you for considering that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, because it puts us in a bind if we're not careful what we're doing.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
okay. I think we're all pretty good on this now, but what we need,
I'm actually still confused, John.
all
if
right,
you don't mind.
sure, go ahead.
We don't know how much, because it sounds like even the Board of Fire Engineers is saying there's more money coming in. Okay, Police Chief Bilodeau, do you have a figure on how much you plan on not spending out of your appropriated budget this year?
I do not. I don't have the numbers. I wasn't prepared to come and talk about the numbers tonight, but that's something easily I can look at tomorrow. We've been on a spend and freeze. We haven't been spending anything other than essentials for the department that we need. If I can talk briefly regarding the cruiser, if you don't.
Can I pause you for 1
Yeah.
minute, just to stay on that one topic?
Yeah.
Martha, where'd you get your $109,000 from the police department from? Chief doesn't know what that is.
109 was fire,
What's the 70, is it 74?
Right.
Yes.
that's police.
Yeah, how'd you get that?
Big
Police
use.
department gave it to me.
I think at the last meeting, if it was at the last meeting we had in September, but from this point forward, we've been spending money, obviously based on salaries and essentials that we need for
Okay,
the
so that's a
department.
really poor estimate, it sounds like, and I have to bring it up one more time. We delayed this meeting so that we could get accurate numbers towards the end of the year, right?
I frankly didn't know that that was the priority of the committee
You were
for
on
this
the,
meeting.
you were on the email to John,
I sure
Jamie
was,
and myself.
right, I saw the email, but I did not get that sense.
Let me go, I think we've laid out what we need next month. We've got two meetings, we got December 9 and December 16. Which one do you feel comfortable with these figures that we talked about? I think you know the figures, the list we want. But basically, it's three things. It's what savings you have that you're turning over, what encumbered funds you are gonna encumber, and a basic review of the tax base. Those are the three things we need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Chairman,
Okay.
one of the reasons I'm a little upset about it is, we'll find out about it after they've decided what it's gonna be returned to the town, not beforehand as part of the decision-making process, and it's just a lack of preparation on it.
Okay.
That's the only thing deciding that. I think if there is a kitty of money, we should know exactly how much it is, or at least within $50,000 of what it is, and we should be able to say, hey, how are you planning on re-pushing that money out, all these doors to take care of your repaving and all this stuff? And what are we expecting the town to have back? Instead, what we're going to get is a budget hearing for a 2021 budget, where we have to go back and revisit what the money came into the slush fund, where it went, because it's gonna already be gone, and then what's actually being returned to town. I think this meeting is pointless, because
I wish,
nobody's
it
here
would
with
be
any data.
nice if we had more specific figures. I agree with you.
What is the total tax, like, what's the,
Let me
What's
finish,
the bottom line
let me
tax
finish,
number?
Jim, and then I'll get back to you.
okay,
Sorry, Chairman,
Go ahead, we've actually got a discussion there, Jim.
So-
We can have-
we think we might have saved $500,000 or $571 or whatever that is, that's the squishy number we're trying to figure out, right?
Mhm.
What's the total, how much taxes do we, what's the budget?
$7 million.
7 million?
Okay,
So
Okay.
half a million is what percent
$7
of
million
7
total
million?
town budget.
Seven,
Yeah, 7.5%, 8%.
well, we will try to get this all together to you a week before our first meeting in December. So that's what you're looking for.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're looking at the 2nd of December or something like that.
Yeah, we'll work on it.
Okay, and, you know,
Half
if you have any questions, let me know, or send out an email, so we can all be on the same sheet of music. If you, I think you know what we need,
That's your 7%.
and we're happy to clarify it if you need to, but, okay. Anything else any other new business or unspoken that we have to deal with today?
I'd just like to make the point that this, that we're in challenging times, and, obviously there's a lot of back and forth, and you're hearing a lot of questions from us. But I think we need to do this so that we're all headed in the right direction, and I think, the budget committee is, we take our jobs very seriously, so I hope that people are not sort of taking, anything more than that out of this. It's just that, the numbers are, we're in tough times, and we need to make sure that we're gonna be successful as a town. So, that's really what's driving this.
Yeah, I like the point
Going
of,
into 2021, right, we're gonna have to start making decisions on what projects we're gonna work on. Are we gonna build a new this, or fix a new that, whatever it is. What are these projects that we're thinking about, and what is on hold? I know we're talking about a sidewalk, that's not a sidewalk, it's a safety something or other.
Safety lane.
Yeah, and so because it's not a sidewalk, if you put safety on it, you can go forward with it. Is that something that has to happen? It hasn't, I mean.
well, that's what the selectmen are gonna tell us.
Well, my point is that, if we're gonna be making these, budget decisions, these hard decisions, we have to know what projects make sense and what projects don't make sense, to delay.
Is there any selectman member that is on the, what used to be the sidewalk committee, that can speak to the progress of the project and where we're at?
Got a chairman right here, you can speak to it.
So I'm Derek Wilson, 33 Coleman, Toronto. I'm the chairman of the Bike Safety Committee, and so I can talk to probably quite a bit of it. And but what I'd like to say is that I understand this committee is talking about a lot of very important serious business for the town. But what I wanna say is that the bike safety lane is a very serious, important project for this town. And I'm relatively new to the town, but I was fortunate enough to get on this committee and find out that this safety lane, bike lane, call it what you will, we call it the safety lane, has been going on in discussions because it's so important for safety for at least 8+ years. It's been on the master plan for at least 8+ years. And so the committee, when we started in the beginning of January, there was a lot of interesting things there. One of the things was that the town has the possibility of getting a grant from the state. And the state will cover 80% of the cost for this town. So we have this long duration safety issue for the town that we have a chance to actually get a lot of money supplied by the state to do this in a very economical way. So as part of that, one of the things that the committee did is we took survey of the town in February. And what we found out was this very strong demand for the bike safety lane in this town. In fact, the question we asked was, how would you support this bike safety lane if we were able to get a grant? And with that, 76% of the respondents to this survey were in favor of doing that. We asked a follow-up question that said, if we didn't get the grant, would you still be in favor of the safety lane? 58% said they would be in favor of it even if we didn't get the grant, which tells us there's a lot of people in this town that are willing to pay taxes in order to get the safety lane. And it's very important to them. What was also interesting is going back to 2017, Millington did a visioning survey. And this was the question. Should we increase, decrease, or hold same with tax funding for each of the following? It was a list of different items. And number one on this was walking and bicycle tax. At 60%, the respondents were willing to increase taxes to pay for this tax. Number two on the list was environmental protection. That came in at 47%. Number three was the library and event activities, which came in at 28%. So not only is there a very strong desire for the residents of this town to have this safety line, it's also, when we look at it for long term, there's been a long demand for this. And now we have the opportunity to get a grant and be able to get it on very low dollars for this safety line in our town. It's just starting. So that's my initial thought. We will welcome to ask any questions you have.
Sure, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Continue. First of all, my initial question was, can you give us an update on where we are spending? That's why we're sitting there. Number two, in response to your opening statement there, if you want to call it that, typically the town doesn't act on a survey, they act on voting. I don't think many people in this town have a lack of desire for a walking or a bike lane. I think a lot of people in this town have a problem with the way that it was captured. Okay? So, if you don't mind, just fiscally, Mr. Wilson, could you fill us in on how much money has been spent out of that money that was seed money to fund the grant? Where we are, if we plan on spending the rest of it?
So I don't spend any money, as far as I'm aware, there's been no money spent out of that $140,000.
Okay, so back to the original question. Mr. Marconi, would you please fill us in on what's been spent out of the $140,000 seed money for the grant?
Nothing, sir.
Good, that's great. Do you anticipate spending the $140,000 this year?
Depends on where the grant comes from.
You don't anticipate that? You don't anticipate having the grant awarded?
Well, we still have the paperwork into the state, and waiting to hear from them. We're not anticipating.
So it could happen in the next 6 weeks?
I don't think so.
So let me correct that, we may anticipate, but we cover that money pending the grant.
Yeah.
Was there any money
That
spent
needs to be
doing
on the
surveying?
report. That needs to be on the report.
Right.
That's good.
Didn't we just talk about the fact that you can't encumber money that it will not be spent within the next fiscal cycle?
I think if you have the money for the grant, it gets off.
Well, it's not. It's not for the grant, it was added on to the general budget. It's
Now,
not
what I'm saying is that the town share of the project if you get the grant, spending that money depends on getting the grant.
correct.
And I believe that that's budgeting correct. If you encumber the money, the state makes a decision on the grant, probably within this next year. They're either gonna give you the grant or you won't. My personal side is, I think if you don't get it next year, you're never gonna get it. The state's gonna be too broke.
Well, that was being my
You'll never
question.
see that grant money again.
Where are we in the sort of the queue? Because it's my understanding the state's gonna, award other towns grant money. Do we know where we are in the queue for this?
I believe the grants are all on hold right now because of the financial straits of the state. That's kind of the feedback I've got. I'm not positive on that, just my conjecture on this, but, none of the 140 has been spent. It can't be spent because the town voted only to spend it for the application for the grant. The grant that can't go through, the money goes back into the, general fund or whatever fund it goes into. I'm not positive on that. So we can't spend that money.
Okay, let me control the conversation.
That
Please, wait,
$140,000,
okay, maybe,
that $140,000, there was a certain amount of money that was spent, that this was good, that needed on, surveying and a bunch of work that was supposed to be that $140,000, but for some reason, it came out of a different kitty instead of that 140. I don't know all the details of that, but there was a big discussion about that.
We
okay.
spent
all right,
$21,000 for surveying, engineering, and like that to put the grant together.
It came out of the Executive Office Engineering Fund. It can't be funded by the grant, so it couldn't be used out of the 140.
Was that budgeted? I don't think it was budgeted though.
No, it was found
We
money from
discussed that at
something.
the last meeting. There was no budget for that stuff.
The town executive office has an engineering line that can be used for any myriad of items.
What's the balance of that line now?
It's in the negative.
10,000 over, I believe.
So we're over budget.
Yes.
Not the whole executive office though, just that line.
So technically, that $140,000 wasn't spent, but something was spent somewhere to do some
Yeah, that's just what
engineering
they said.
and whatnot.
They spent their engineering money to apply for the grant because they can't spend $140,000. That's a designated match. The application cost does not count towards the match.
And I,
And it- Okay, so that, it came out of their engineering fund.
Engineering had to be part of the process, and it couldn't go forward with the grant without a plan. And the engineering was part of the plan, it had to be done that.
So the
my question, my
taxpayers were
problem
told
with
it
this
was
is that you're over
140.
budget, right? So to me, I understand that if you need to, put a study together in order to get the grant, fine. But I'm struggling with the fact that you're over budget now in that line item.
I guess my comment on that was it should have been the budget should have been bigger, if that's what you anticipated. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the selectmen do have the power to move stuff around, but as a budget committee, we like those numbers to be as accurate as possible.
And we appreciate that, and we're conform with that. But we didn't know the 140 was gonna be appropriated until town meeting day, and all the budgets were in by that time. And we had 140,000 we had to put into the budget on that particular day, Mr. Chairman.
All right, okay.
So that,
Makes
you mean,
sense. Yeah, okay.
not making excuses, but it's.
No, it's a reason, yeah. You didn't know it, get voted, so you didn't necessarily put in the extra money. And then, you found it somewhere
Yes,
else, I mean,
yes.
you saved somewhere else. to make it up. Okay, just-
Samara, I'm sorry,
Could you
Emily
just-
Savinelli would like to speak to the committee. She's on Zoom.
Sure, okay. Go ahead.
I don't know if you can put me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to add just a quick bit about the bike path. I think that, I appreciate that there was a survey done in town, but again, that was pre-COVID. I think if we look at health and safety concerns, I would much rather see money spent for, us getting a new fire truck or us
let's see, that works. Okay, Brandon?
Yeah, so my question immediately then, if we spent $21,000 on the engineering services line item, you had a budget of $20,000 in that engineering line item for the year. Did you do Woodbury Ave inspection?
Gosling Road inspections,
Okay, industrial corridor road engineering permitting?
no, the Board of Selectmen has decided to hold on that project.
Culvert assessments?
I'm sorry,
Culvert assessments?
yes, those were completed.
Okay, and then, other miscellaneous projects, so what is the total expenditure in that line item so far? This year?
30,706.
Seems, I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but it seems too bad when we ask different departments, especially full of first responders, to cut their budget by 15%, and we overspend the engineering services of the executive office by $10,000, 50%. That's a tough one to swallow, just to everybody else's point.
Priorities
Priorities.
and transparency.
You know, it goes to Emily's point too, sorry, I'm not allowing you to call on me. To Emily's point as well, these type of things don't just bake in and pop up when committees go through the correct process through the budget committee and ask for expenditures, and they have their, capital expenditures laid out. This type of thing doesn't happen where we borrow from this one and we make all this stuff happen, when the process goes correctly. It's too bad that we went about it that way with a really light town meeting based upon the world situation that had been going on, and, yeah, it's kind of come to roost now, right? So, anyways, I digress.
Okay, I think we discussed this, and I want to take Jennifer's point that as a budget committee, we take our job seriously. I'd like to say the last few years it's been relatively easy because we've had a strong revenue stream. Next year won't be easy. You know, we'll really have to make some tough decisions. And I think the selectmen understand the information we're looking for. So we can, and again, for us it's a recommendation, but we need to be able to explain as best we can to the town meeting why we have this budget and what it's gonna mean, what it's gonna do. Is there any other unfinished business before we adjourn?
Oh, I thought we were on the beginning.
Okay, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Oh, can I keep going? Is there any? We have
Well,
time constraints?
unfinished business, sure.
Yeah.
What do you got?
I haven't found the right answer yet on if the select board has expenditures that they're planning on taking some of the savings and appropriating to, and how much that might be. Do you guys have plans?
As I think we indicated, by December 1st, we'll have everything written out for you that you would have.
So no plan as of now?
Yes.
We're waiting for the taxes to come in and see where they are prior to making a decision.
Sorry, Martha, if I'm unclear. Totally separate from that, just what the department saved, X% of that is, or X dollars of that you're projecting are going to go to this project or something like that, or is 100% of the savings, the actual department savings being returned? That's what I'm curious to know.
We'll have that for you by the 8th,
But,
Okay. Great.
We have a 68-page document from something called, Fire Service Planning.
Yeah, that's next year.
This is not to be discussed today, this is
No.
to be discussed next year.
Next budget, we got, the fire budget comes up in this December.
So this is just
Okay.
for review.
It's just for review, yeah. But I thought, you know, it's nice to have that pre-knowledge.
Great.
Okay, anything else in terms of unfinished business? Okay, thank you very much. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all coming to this extra meeting. I think it was useful.